Hello again, time for a new video. I was down 2 videos last week if I remember correctly, so hopefully this should be the last one and I'll have made up my deficit. So let's talk about why animals cannot and do not hold the same moral weight as humans. Let's start with the obvious. In order to have morality function, it needs sapience to be enforced. Sapience being basically rational consciousness, the ability for an animal or other creature to think at a higher level, not just relying on emotions or instinct. It is required for morality because in order to have a moral principle, you need something beyond a short-term stimulus or an instinctual reaction. Think about it. When I do this, I make a rational choice to do so. Or I could do this irrationally, or I could get a drink of water for my own interests, or even out of instinct. Regardless of all these things, the thing that is needed for me to make a moral judgment and say, this is right, this is wrong, because of this reason or that, is fundamentally my capability for rationalization, for reasoning, to assess and make a call. A cow cannot do that. Neither can a roach. They just feel and react. And when they feel and react and get a result, they act accordingly. Ethics goes before that and says, what is best to do? Not what feels best to do, but what is best to do under these criteria I have reasoned. That is the key to morality. It could be consequentialist, could be purely natural arguments, could be deontological, could be utilitarian. It does not matter. Whatever excuse given, whoever came up with the justification, an animal cannot hold the same weight as human because they can't enforce morality. They are mentally incapable of doing so. Animals cannot override instinct as well. When a cow has an instinct to run, it runs, unless it is quite literally trained, forced to not rely on instinct. You can do that with animals, it's just difficult. But importantly, you have to basically punish the animal until Pavlovian conditioning sets in and it realizes, okay, I shouldn't be doing this, I should be doing that. And thus, the instinct is basically forced to shut down. Now, someone may point out, oh, hey, don't animals protect their young? Yeah, that is still an instinct. I don't know if you know this, but there's the reason they call it a parental instinct. The instinct to defend one's own young is a deeply rooted one that is easily explained with Darwinism. Think about it. If an animal didn't protect their kids, for example, let's say there's a bear in the woods, and they just left their children, guess what would happen? Those kids would die, parent doesn't have any genes left, parent doesn't pass anything on, they die, bloodline gone. See the issue? But if the parent has an instinct to protect their kids, sure, that may end up with the parent dead by the end of it, but if the kids live, which they likely will, well then now they can pass their genes on to the next generation. And thus, generation over generation, it is an instinct in almost every animal to protect their own young, unless absolutely necessary. For example, when a gerbil or other thinks that they're gonna have their kids eaten anyways, they'll sometimes eat it themselves. On a cruel justification of essentially, well, if I'm gonna lose a child, I might as well at least get the nutrients from it. And that's an instinctual thing. Humans are animals, and sometimes we have issues overriding our instinct. But we still can do it on several occasions. For example, let's say cannibalism. You're stuck in a place and you need food, but the only food source you have is another person. A person's instinct is to eat, to survive. Sometimes that'll lead to eating people. It's disgusting, and the body doesn't like it, but it will do what it has to do to survive. But a person can choose, rationally, on the basis of morality or ethics, to say, no, I will not do so. I will not eat this person, I would rather starve. And they have the ability to do so. And that is what separates us from the rest of the animal kingdom. We have the ability to choose that. A dolphin is the perfect example of what happens when you have all the cognitive abilities of a human without that ability to be sapient, to choose right and wrong. Because what do dolphins do? They hurt other animals, like violent hedonists sadists. And they act in very, very inappropriate ways. Because, hey, it feels good, and their instincts say, I gotta do this, I gotta do that, so they do. And their emotions sway them from there. Adding on to this, sentience and not sapience being used to define moral equivalence would put mosquitoes, cows, and humans on the same level. Would you honestly say that a mosquito has the same mental faculties as a cow? And a cow is a human. The cow and human, some people would make that argument. Mosquitoes, though, cockroaches, would you make that argument? Because there's legitimate evidence suggesting that mosquitoes and other bugs, not all, but other bugs, can indeed feel pain, and thus are sentient. And if they are sentient, then they are equivalent. The carriers of malaria that cause the biggest issues for humanity are equivalent to a cow, which is fully capable of thinking and eating and existing, and a human. That is absurd. Flatly absurd. Animals are also unable to consent to moral behavior and thus will act immorally too. Deer have been on record eating meat of other animals. Why? Because they're hungry or they need something. It's the same reason your dog might eat grass or their own poop, and a cat doing the same occurs. They do not think, oh, this is gross. They think, I need these nutrients. This has those nutrients. I'm going to eat that. Even if they're natural herbivores, they will still do what they have to survive. Animals act in accordance with this. Survival of themselves and their children. That is what matters to them. That is all that matters. Reproduction, protecting that which is reproduced, and protecting themselves so they can continue the cycle. They do not have the capability to act morally. So holding them to the same moral standard, the same weight, as a human being, someone who can choose right and wrong, is absurd. Flatly absurd. It would be like saying a person who is physically unable to choose yes or no on an answer has the same weight in their choice as a person who can and does. No, they don't have the same weight because the person has a different ability. That is just how things are. And finally, what are emotions but an evolutionary extension of instinct? To feel something and react immediately. For example, I just hit myself. I felt something. Slightly annoyed, slightly pained. I can feel pain when I force things. I can feel pain when I do something stupid. And I can feel pain every time I listen to certain teachers. Freaking ethics. But, time and place for that one. Regardless, I can feel pain. But the initial reaction is largely instinctual. Think about it. When you get a shot, most people tense up because, injury. You have to force yourself not to, through reason, and through consciously telling your brain, hey, knock it off, let us relax. And so, that's what we have to do. But for animals, which do have emotions but lack reasoning, it is purely emotional. It is just instinct on steroids. Instead of, oh, I fear caves because usually people die there, so those who are naturally afraid of caves live. It is, I don't like this because I feel weird, so I'm going to do something else so I don't feel weird. It is literally just an extension of instinct. It is not somehow distinct. It is just instinct that adapts, that grows. And it is short-term in nature. Therefore, it is not equivalent to logical reason which lasts for long periods. An animal cannot hold the same moral weight as humans. It cannot. one cow is not equivalent to one person. Because a human can choose to sacrifice itself for the cow will not, and it cannot. Unless it believes that it is the parent, and thus preserving it would preserve its genes, that other being, the cow will not make an active effort to defend the other person, nor can it. The person can, though, and so they are held to a higher moral standard and higher moral weight. That is how things must be, because that is how reality is, and those who argue against it are essentially arguing in the basis of fantasy. Not to mention, as mentioned, when it came to utilitarianism, we need people around in order for morals to exist, to function. As stated, you need sapience to enforce morality, the ability to think, to process. That's what you need. And if you lack that, then you don't have morals, because you don't have anything to think of morals. Even with a God that has all the morals carved into stone, the cows don't care, the goats don't care, they won't follow them. And so the morals have no weight, they have no value outside of what value we give them. And thus it is important for humanity to stay alive, because otherwise, those morals cease. They cannot function. Remove humanity, your morals don't matter. Your beliefs on what is right and wrong among the animal kingdom don't matter. Quite literally irrelevant. Now, does that mean we should just abuse animals? No. Animals have their own values and their own use. They are fundamentally useful, therefore preserving them is good, and naturally, of course, making sure they're happy produces the best results, so taking good care of them is also advised. But they are not the same morally in weight as a person, because they do not have the ability to think like a person. There are some that are close, but they are not there yet, and so should not be considered the same and judged accordingly. To argue against that is to argue against the world itself. And frankly, I don't think that's a battle anyone can win. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.